Hello. Now we are going to analyze the goals of Ukraine global provocation. Firstly, to put the responsibility for the inevitable financial and economic collapse of the USA and the whole unjust global financial economic system under intrigues of an external enemy, and Russia and China are the best candidates for this role. And then these countries can be accused of the subsequent catastrophic worsening of the material status of the population of the country and the whole earth to cause their estrangement. Public opinion has been prepared in this direction by leading English and American mass media for many years. In accordance with the details of the Global Risks 2014 report, prepared upon request of the World Economic Forum, the risk that invokes the highest degree of anxiety and is number one in the list of risks is fiscal crisis in key economies. And the main budget state debts one can find now not in Russia, not in China, but in the USA, Japan, and the countries of the European Union. Secondly, to raise the trust to the USA, the international arena, and among the Americans proper. Broad masses of population in the vast majority of countries treat the USA as a major threat to the world, these countries being afraid of as well as hated more and more, which naturally has sufficient quantity of quite negative consequences. Even today and tomorrow it can be dangerous, if not catastrophic, to the ruling circles of the United States. But if the enemy dangerous to all is found, then the USA will be addressed for help, which in its turn will raise its international authority and trust to it. Fear before the enemy is also a good means of controlling the population of one's own country. At the end of 2013, the global poll finds that the country seen as representing the greatest threat to peace today is the United States. Not only did the USA top the list with an aggregate of 24%, but the runner-up threat country, Pakistan, was way behind at 8%. China was third at 6%, followed by North Korea, Iran and Israel at 5% each. The survey of opinions across 65 countries by pollster Win Gallup International recorded some of the strongest anti-American sentiments, predictably in countries widely regarded as rivals, led by Russia, where 54% of respondents said the USA was the greatest threat to peace, and China 49%. But the view that the US poses the greatest threat to peace was also strongly held in some purported US allies, such as NATO partners Greece and Turkey, 45% each, and Pakistan, 44%, which is also a top recipient of US aid. Germans were more ambivalent, with the US selected as the greatest threat, 17%, just ahead of Iran, 16%, as were British respondents who put the US and Iran in joint first place among threats to peace, 15% each. Elsewhere in Latin America, the US topped the list of threats to peace for a significant number of respondents. In Mexico, for example, 37%, Brazil 26%, and Peru 24%. In Ukraine, which is often described as being deeply divided between pro-Russian and pro-Western camps, the US didn't fare well. 33% of respondents choose the US as a greater danger, compared to just 5% who picked Russia. The Ukraine segment of the survey was conducted in October. American respondents named Iran as the greatest threat to peace, 20%, followed by Afghanistan, 14%, North Korea, 13%, and the United States itself, 13%. So that citizens of the USA consider their own country being more dangerous than Russia or China. As the crisis in Ukraine continues, a new national poll indicates that for the first time in more than a decade, more than half of Americans see Russia as a serious threat to the USA. According to the poll, 69% of all Americans say they see Russia as a threat to the United States. That's a 25 percentage point increase since 2012 and represents the highest number on that question since the breakup of the Soviet Union, says CNN polling director Keating Holland. 31% now say they don't see Russia as a threat, down from 53% 2 years ago. The poll indicates that Americans place Russia in the same ballpark as North Korea, 71%, and Iran, 70%, when it comes to being seen as a threat to the United States. A predictable result. The American media is a minister of propaganda for the government and the corporations. Helps Washington paint Russia in bad colors. Stephen Cohen accurately describes US media coverage of Russia as a tsunami of shamefully unprofessional and politically inflammatory articles. During the later years of the Clinton regime, the US government permitted 5 large conglomerates to concentrate the varied, dispersed, and somewhat abandoned media. The value of these large mega companies depends on their federal broadcast licenses. Therefore, the media dares not to go against the government on any important issue. In addition, the media conglomerates are no longer run by journalists, but by corporate advertising executives and former government officials, with an eye not on facts but on advertising revenues and access to government sources. All 5 of the mainstream media are all reading off the exact same memo of Foscate and sense as the fact that what happened in Ukraine was violent coup to overthrow the democratically elected Ukrainian government, with the decisive role of neo-Nazi and ultra-nationalist groups. Thirdly, to justify long-term extraordinary measures for bringing order before the general public in the United States and other Western countries that will become inevitable at a certain stage of development of the global crisis. The desire to apply such measures is just a matter of time. The report Known Unknowns, Unconventional Strategic Shocks in Defense Strategy Development by the U.S. Army War College Strategic Studies Institute predicts widespread civil violence might be tolerable in some parts of the world. Shock would result if this occurred inside the United States or inside a key strategic partner, to such an extent that they force DOT to radically re-roll for domestic security, population controls, consequence management, and stabilization. This publication is the work of the US government. However, the position of the author of the report, retired Colonel Nathan Fry, doesn't obviously reflect the policy or position of the US Department of Defense, as it is written in the preamble to the study. Nevertheless, the very fact of its appearance means a lot. The action plan for suppressing civil unrest was developed in the USA as a response to civil unrest in the 60s. Its various early versions were declassified and became available to the general public. The most recent version, named Complan 3502, is known only fragmentarily, but the things that are known allow talking about large-scale preparation of law enforcement structures to the coming civil unrest. While being the head of the IMF, Dominique Strauss-Kahn warned that if economic growth is not restored promptly, then social unrest may happen in many countries, including advanced economies. The people have reacted with feelings going from surprise to anger, and from anger to fear. And the crisis is in future. No doubt we'll have it. Fourthly, to get the grounds for development of the new large-scale race of armaments as a means of revitalizing of the economies, other measures are not helpful. Its strategic tasks are to reach the decisive military advantage over the enemy and secure the global hegemony with a military way, or exhaust the enemy with exorbitant military spending compared to the experience of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, to provoke riots and eliminate the existing regimes in Russia and China. The USA took measures to decrease its military budget under the pressure of the global economic crisis, growing budget deficiency, dissatisfaction of population with ungrounded high military expenses. The USA has less than 4% of the global population, about 20% of the GDP, and about 40% of global military expenses. That budget reached its maximum in the amount of $711 billion in 2011, and then dropped to $664 billion in 2012 to 582 billion in 2013, with a forecast of 575 billion in 2014. Naturally, it caused dissatisfaction of the military branch of the USA and called the measures to be taken to improve the situation. The military threat is the best means to justify the growth of military expenses. If in early 2014, shortly before the coup d'etat in Ukraine, NATO Secretary General Anders Rasmussen expressed his concern about dropping of the military spending of the USA and the European member countries of the NATO, while increasing military spending in Russia and China. He told BBC Newsnight, "When governments are forced to cut deficits and make deep cuts, it's difficult to argue defense should be exempted. But of course, it is a matter of concern, taking into account that other powers invest more and more in defense, and at the end of the day it means we will have less influence on the international scene. The vacuum will be filled by other powers, and they do not necessarily share our interests and our values." It is quite cynical and sincere at the same time. Thus not proportionally strong influence of the oligarchic elite of the USA's international arena that it has due to the fact of huge military expenses and the opportunity to intimidate other countries with its military force, not to share the interests and values of other nations and its own nation. Evidently, it is impermissible, and in months Rasmussen stated the following: "The Ukraine crisis and what we have seen in Crimea has been a wake-up call, and it must be followed by increased European investment in defense if we are to ensure credible deterrence and collective defense in the future." Fifthly, to unite the military and political unions collapsing like a house of cards, to use the military hysteria for subordinating the countries of Latin America, Middle East, and the European Union to its interests. Anders Rasmussen declared in a speech at the Brookings Institution that Russia's advances in Ukraine were the greatest threat to European security since the Cold War. The governments of some Eastern European countries now expect to see more NATO troops on their territories in reaction to what they fear will be Russian attempts to destabilize the former Soviet Republic. In particular, Poland and Estonia are most active about it. Poland asked NATO to station 10,000 troops on its territory on Tuesday as a visible demonstration of the alliance's resolve to defend all its members after Russia's seizure of Crimea. Estonia managed to get NATO's blessing to turn the brand new Emery military airfield near Tallinn into the first NATO base in the country. The US Air Force, USF, 48th Fighter Wings, has deployed additional aircraft and personnel to support NATO's air policy mission in the Baltics. There are attempts from Washington, if not a membership, but more close collaboration of Sweden and Finland with NATO. At the same time, polls show a clear majority oppose NATO membership in Sweden and Finland. About a third of Swedes favor joining the alliance and only around a fifth of Finns. That's all. We'll continue.